that you can improve things. It's not working.
Plug into the thing.
Yeah, maybe just press the button next.
Okay, sorry about that, a bit of a technical glitch. I wanted to, again, through my presentation, just show you some little snippets globally that paint a picture of where our young people are today. And the first one, and my apologies to those that might have seen it, but it was just a very short clip of a very long study called Design to Move that Nike in America did. And if you haven't seen it, I just wanted you to spend a little bit of time to watch this.
I probably would make a time machine. I would make medicine for the sick. I'd probably invent something new. If I could have an extra 5 years to live, you said 5, right? 5 years. It's a long time. I would bring my uncle back because I miss him very much. I would get more hamsters. I would probably want to go looking for dark matter. I think I'd go looking for aliens. If I could live after 5 years, I was thinking about making like a helicopter, like a bird helicopter. But I don't have any wood. I'd probably teach my sister not to hate Juno. I would try and invent a machine that lets you run at light speed. If I had 5 more extra years to live, I would be the boss of all the chipmunks. Because I did nothing teaching me to do this so I don't really know. I think I do anything. Why are you asking me that?
Okay, so we are facing a generation, this young generation, that could possibly live 5 years less than we do. Yep. Okay, so the world has stopped moving. We have got a generation, although we're designed to move, we've got, over the last 2 generations, developed countries, physical activity has dropped 32% in that short period of time. So what we're looking at is, on this little cartoon, we've been outside all day, go out and play, so what do? They take their little iPads out and sit down and do it outside. So we are in a race to slow down. It's vehicles, machines, technology do all the work for us. So what's profound in our economies is we all know that leads into a really deadly cycle about all of the economies facing health issues. So it's a very financially a concern, but also a generational concern. So that's the latest toy that's just come out in America, and that's not animated, that's real. The newest potty trainer on deck. Oh dear. Okay, in Australia, the obesity levels. If the weight increases continue, by 2025, 80% of Australian adults will be categorised as obese. D-, at the Global Physical Activity Conference in Canada in May, that was our overall report card on physical physical activity, physical education and sport, we got a D-. How would we feel with a D- on our report card for school? And what does our government do about a D-? This is overall what our report card looked like. And it's really interesting if you have a look at the IMC stands for incomplete, and that's because there is inconclusive evidence as to how they rate them. For example, PE and physical activity participation in schools. What the debate was about was how schools actually measure what physical education is, what physical activity is, and we all know that that terminology can get really confused. I've seen principals talk about in Victoria we have mandated time for PE and health, PE and sport within the curriculum, and they can actually count walking to school lockers as part of that physical activity as part of their PE time. 5 minutes each way, locker change, 5 times a day, 25 minutes times 5, 75 minutes. We've nearly done our 100 minutes. And we have a government that interchanges sport education, physical activity in the same breath and don't actually understand it. So to actually measure it in Australia is very hard. You can see though, the one that really interested me was that we've actually got an A- for our community and our built environment. So we actually have a wonderful environment for sport spectators. Again, nothing to do with physical activity, but it puts lots of bums on seats. But all of the stuff, inconclusive measure of aerobic fitness for our young people, inconclusive measures on how they can, what their movement skills are like. But interestingly, they're saying that our government policies on PE and physical activity and sport in schools is rated at a B-. But how did we stack up? This was made against 14 other countries. Our overall physical activity out of 14, we came 11th. First was Mozambique and New Zealand. Organised sports participation, we came 2nd. Our Kiwi friends came 1st. Active play, again, New Zealand ranked number 1. And in the school environment, England ranked number 1. So, are we heading that way? Can Johnny come outside to eat? These are the latest Australian Bureau of Statistics data about community sport participants for the age groups that we're probably all conscious that we have a lot to do with. The interesting thing is it's saying that 63.1% are involved in community sport. If you turn that around, that means that there are 37% of kids that aren't involved in community sport. So the only sport that they have is at school. And if you look at the girls, for example, that's an even bigger percentage. That the only experience that they'll have with sport is at school. So what we've got to try and do is make that experience a good one, because if they're not going to get a good experience at school, they're not going to go down the road at a local club or anything else to get more of it. So what can you do? You guys are the game changers in all of this. You're the ones that get these young people when they come into school, the captive audience. What's interestingly that's changing at the moment is that we have a government that's actually starting to understand that it really is important to get young people very early involved in physical education and physical activity, and hopefully that will give them a lifelong passion for being physically active and involving in sport, whether it be a recreation sport or an organised sport of any sort. So there is lots of targeted audiences now that they're trying to reach, with schools certainly being the target. In my job, we have a lot of national sporting organisations that are starting to come to the school sports unit or the education jurisdictions and asking the questions of how do we get into schools? What do we have to do to get into schools or to build a relationship with schools? So it's really important that as physical educators that you understand that first experience of sport has to come from a really high quality physical education program and skill development. If young people have an early experience of success with skill development in physical education, their attitude to a lifelong physical education experience will be so much better. So that's the key. There's international evidence everywhere about the impact on not only mental and physical health, but academic achievement. It's so persuasive. All of those areas around the world are actually doing current research on just the impact on what sport and physical education has on young people when they're at school. So this should be our vision. Our vision should be about centrally a nationally renowned school-based physical education and sports system that feeds into a school sports system that feeds into a community sports system. That's really what we need to be looking at. How we do that is how we engage, how the Education Ministry engages with the Sports Ministry and how they start to talk together. There are internationally a number of countries that are doing it well. I mentioned earlier England with their school system that ranked #1. They have a very strong system that's based on that model. New Zealand is doing very similar work as well. Okay, that's a video that I really like. That's not good. Thank you.
I've got down here. Come on, go. Come on, put them around your waist. Drop the ball. Go on, Bob, tell me more. Watch it, good minute.
Okay, as educators, we've come a very, very long way from that. But certainly reports, people are starting to look at pedagogy that's involved in teaching physical education and what makes a good physical educator, and looking at trying to replicate that into a classroom and looking at teaching it using those, using the art of teaching physical education in delivering lessons in English, maths, science, just across the curriculum. But it's interesting, you know, academic learning time measures are still talking about the best PE teachers are doing only 34% of really active learning time in their learning time where you're trying to achieve your lesson objectives. If you take out getting changed, your warm up, the cool down, the actual core of your lesson is still only 34%, and that's the best teacher, 34% of activity time, and the worst teachers are about 6%. I know that one was all about the phys ed teacher, but I think when we're actually doing our lessons and keeping people active, there's certain really key elements that we need to look into. This slide really is a rhetorical question. It's just to get you thinking about, you know, what does a school with a high-performing PE and sport program look like? If you had an image of one in your head, what does it actually look like? What would you see as you're going to school, coming to school, in the classrooms, around the playground? Just some questions for you to start to think about if you really need to understand what a good PE school looks like. I think part of the vision that you saw earlier was about making sure that we bring our subject area to the front of the school. It's quite often that it's at the back of the school. Literally, a gym is at the back of the school, but figuratively as well. We don't, you're all really busy people, you're coaching teams, you're taking in at recesses and lunchtime, busy preparing for lessons, so very rarely get involved in that rigorous conversation about curriculum and what you can actually do across the school. Certainly in some of our trips that we've done to the UK and New Zealand, where they're doing lots of work around embedding sport and physical education within the school as part of building that school culture, they really do bring the imagery of the importance of sport to the very front of the school. So everywhere you walk in around the school, you see young people that actually attend the school as part of their the imagery around the school, as part of the decoration around the school. But this is the kind of stuff that we also see. If sport is used to advance academic, social and sporting and other student outcomes, all of these other things need to happen at the same time. You have effective sport PE links between primary and secondary schools in your local area, so you're building up that transition process as well. That the school culture changes to actively embrace sport as part of achieving its wider educational objectives. You involve sporting organisations, and you have to start integrating it into other lessons. And there is predominantly more and more PE teachers that are being used to work across other subject areas, because part of the intrigue about PE teachers is that you're the relationship builders, you're the doers in the school, and quite often that relationship building that occurs by working with young people while they're moving. The studies show that young people more often than not will give more information out about themselves. They will cut down a lot of the barriers while they're actually physically active, and that often happens in physical education classes, which is why they tend to build up really good relationships with their physical education teachers. So they do use that along in certainly student welfare is usually has a lot of physical education teachers that are involved in that as well. So it's a very broad scope, but that just gives you an idea of some of the work that internationally that schools are doing to try and raise that profile. And this is some of the imagery. These aren't just little photos that are or pictures that are hanging on the walls. They're ceiling to floor imagery of current kids at the school, so that they actually have some ownership over it. So these are just some of the photos that we've seen. This was a school in a really low socio-economic area of London, and that virtually was at the front office as you walked in the door, was their gymnasium. They moved to the very front, behind their reception area, and as you walked in you saw big imagery of their students, of the sporting facilities that were in front of the school. And again, these are all current students that are really active doing their physical education classes at their school carnivals. Okay, so again, another question to ask you. If you were to think about what would be on your school's epitaph, if you really had it as a good PE school, what would it look like? What would the epitaph say about your school? And for this to happen, what needs to happen for it to be there? So what is the end goal? What would you like your school to look like? Particularly even if as a starting point, your physical education faculty, what do you want it to look like? What do you have to do to get it there? And your question for you all is, have you done enough? And I think there's another one.
Children text in finance. Text 1800 views. Make an Olympian text 202 national champions. national champion takes thousands of athletes. To make an athlete, it takes millions of children around the world inspired to choose sport.
Nigerians are rocking top feeling as realised in the country here in London. He is the 2012 Olympic champion.
哇！要幾英前高翻兩周落地，穩陣落地，喐都唔喐，為喺倫敦嘅奧運提早個目
La finale di London 24, il numero che nazionalmente anche Maguire, l'ultimo tempo per la fine su
Лондон. Соревнования на 100 метров БТТ. И старт. На плане дистанции вперед вырывается Эри Ломас. Он чуть-чуть приближает Стива Джонса и Джастина Матиса. Гонка идет между Джонсоном и Ломасом. Последние несколько метров похоже Ломас. Среди долго не просто. Атмосфера прекрасная.
Here in London, he is the 2012 Olympic champion.
Okay, so my message to you from that one is never underestimate the work that you do. That to make a champion takes a true amount of hard work that starts with physical education teachers in schools. So working with young people is really critical to make sure that they have a really good understanding of their own self, of their own fundamental motor skills, of them being able to actually participate successfully in sport. I put this one up because I thought that it was a poster, a huge big poster that we saw in the gym, but it actually kind of puts it all into a nutshell, is that all we can ask of you is to learn as much as you can, be the best that you can be, and just go hard at it, and hard as you possibly can. Lift the profile of the work that you do, make sure that people understand the amount of the work that you do, and I'm sure all of you are well appreciated within your school, but certainly within your wider community. As a collegial group of people, the voice that you have collectively together in the community is probably very, very strong, but maybe not noted. So it's really important that as a group, and as certainly as ACHPER Tas, that you have this voice, that you can work really hard for your profession. So thank you for doing what you do, and again, just work hard and run yourself ugly. Thank you.
Thank you again. I think that Big Sport is extremely lucky to have you. And I actually wish you were down here at Taffy Works. Marvellous to have you down here. And I think some of the messages that you were able to portray through that are really important to us as a profession. And I know you've come a long way and made a big commitment to us today. And I thank you for your work, and look forward to having a lovely evening with you. Thanks very much. Jude, Maguire, good work.
Our first tweet away, so we want to beat things for that. So the first tweet away goes to Aaron Humphrey. Hey, Aaron. Come down together, buddy. $200 gift out to the RHS. During Janice's session, we've created another hashtag. Sorry if I'm doing overload you. If you want to engage with Janice this afternoon, you'll answer some questions for them. So just created another one. One might put it up there. It's just hashtag Ask Janice. So if you have any questions around assessment and Tara, and this can do a presentation. Not a Tara, but whatever we present, ask Janice, or just like this. So if you want to tweet for that, and Janice will follow that during the day and address any questions that come up this afternoon. And the next tweet away will pop up shortly.
All right, well, it's a great deal of pleasure that I'll introduce the next person to the podium. Janice Atkin. Janice, in a former life, I can say now, and quite confidently, worked at the coalface of developing up the Australian curriculum HPE document. She's been involved with that right from pretty much its inception, and was instrumental in the formulation of that, and working with literally hundreds of organisations and HPE teachers around the country as the executive officer with ACHPER. Now, she runs her own consultancy business. I'm absolutely delighted that she's here with us today. She's a specialist HPE teacher, as is Jude, as most of our speakers are. Ella's not, but she's a guru of grants, right? So that's all right. So please, if you could welcome Janice to the podium, and we look forward to hearing what she has to say about our old friend assessment. Okay.
I think I got Delta marks going there. Assessment's the bone of everyone in existence. But hopefully today I'll be able to give you some tips on how to make it more manageable and a bit of fun, because learning should be fun, this assessment should be fun, really. With any of my presentations today, I am doing some interactive sessions this afternoon, but I know there's more interactive sessions with physical activity that are happening at the same time, so that'll probably be more attractive to some people after sitting down for about 3 hours in here. But you can access the presentations on the website there. All I ask is don't share it too widely, because I am now trying to make a living off that website. So if people start giving stuff away, don't share it. So, I'll start it again. This will teach me to try and write the image. So, you've probably all seen this one before, and it's about fairness in assessment. But what I want you to think about today is, why do we think we need to use one task for all students to be able to give them a rank of A to E? So hopefully what I'll be able to do today is actually break that myth. So that when it comes to assessment, we don't need to assess every single student the same way. We just need to be able to be confident that the judgments that we make for each student is justified, and that we've got enough supporting evidence to say this is why I gave this student the grade that I gave them. But there's also another myth, that reporting equals assessment. And that's not the case. Reporting is a one point in time judgment that we make on students based on the evidence that we've got available to us at that point in time. And that's when we use an A to E. And unfortunately, the A to E has been pushed upon us, I guess, is the nicest way we can put it, by some agreements that were made around funding in the federal government. But that's the only time where you have to use an A to E. And it's actually been shown by a lot of research that if you're using an A to E when you're looking at assessment of students, now assessment is that ongoing stuff that happens every time you're in the classroom or out of the field of your class. If you're using A to E as a description of the achievement at that point in time, it's absolutely meaningless to the kids. They're meaningless to the kids. Because they don't understand what A to E means. And there's been a lot of research that's shown, it's been shown on maths tests and other, I guess, academic subject tests where it's pen and paper, but I would assume it would be exactly the same for movement-based settings as well. If you hand a test back to a student with just a grade on it, it's been shown that it may maintain their achievement if they retake the test, but in many cases, their performance decreases as a result of getting a grade on exactly the same test written when it's handed back if they resit that test. If you put a grade and comments on that test, and then you ask them to resit it, most often they get a similar score. They don't improve, they don't decrease. If you hand that test back with no grades on, but just commentary about how they've gone, what they've done well, where they need to improve, significant improvements for the majority of students across all levels of achievement. And when PE teachers, we know that feedback is really important when it comes to assessment. So we need to give meaningful feedback, and a grade of A to E on an assessment task isn't necessarily meaningful for students. Alright, so what we're talking about today is assessment. Reporting is something very different, and it's very structural. And I'm not even going to attempt to understand all of the ways that the different states and territories in Australia expect their teachers to report, because there's 8 different processes out there, and for me, none of them really work for kids and parents. They work for bureaucrats, but they don't necessarily work for... I'm allowed to say that. So why do we assess? Please don't take it as the principal made us do it. We assess to collect information on student learning. And that information has to drive our teaching. So we need to be able to collect information each time we go out with kids to understand, did they learn what I intended them to learn? Now there's a precursor to that, which comes as part of your programming and planning. You need to understand what your learning intent is for each lesson. Now, way back in the days when I didn't have any grey hairs, I was head of a department with 11 staff, and I had one guy, Gordon Peter, who in the 3 years I was there, on the last day before I left, actually said, J.A., you know, get what you've been hassling me about all of this time. Because every day, he'd be walking out to class, we'd be walking out to class together, and I go, so Pete, what are you teaching today? Soccer. No. What are you teaching? Soccer. No. What are you teaching? What is it that you want the kids to learn as a result of this lesson? You don't want them to learn soccer. You want them to learn something. And it took 3 years for him to get that there's got to be a learning intention. It also took him 3 years to realise we had syllabus. You if I put two and two together that he didn't even realise there was an orange document that was supposed to be writing. But you need to understand your learning intent before you can actually start making judgments about what you want students to learn. And the beauty of assessment is that if you're making judgments on how students are going, you're in turn making judgments on how you're going. And I always find it quite fascinating when teachers go, oh, look, I got to the end of the unit and the kids just didn't get it, but I don't have time to get them to a point where they get it. And they blame the kids for not getting it. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. You've got to have a look at yourself. How have you presented it? Is there another way to present it that will make it more meaningful so that they get the aha moments that we want? And when you see those aha moments in kids, make a note of it. Because that means that they've actually understood something. So you can make some judgments based on those aha moments. So when you're thinking about your current assessment practices, and if we had more time, we'd have a little bit of a chat here so you can share what you do in your students, because I think that's one of the most important things that you can do. Talk to other people. How do they assess? How do they know how to assess? So think about how you assess. If you're always doing pen and paper assessments, then is that the best way for all students to demonstrate their understanding? Because thinking back to that very first slide, we need to give everyone a fair chance of demonstrating what they now understand. And often pen and paper tests aren't the way that works. Or even take home assignments where they have to do. Think about what you're assessing, how often you assess, and then also why you're assessing that. So I often have conversations with faculties where, you know, they're saying, oh, I spent all weekend marking half the exams. And my response is, well, you're stupid, aren't you? Why are you doing a half-yearly exam? Does it give you any more information about the kids than if you hadn't have done that exam? And often the response is, well, it actually makes my job more difficult because the good kids come out because they're all doing half-yearly exams, they're all stressing out about maths, English, history, they're not studying for a health and PE exam, and then suddenly they bomb out and you've got to justify still giving them an A even though they've failed on a half-yearly exam. Now my response is, you can still give them an A. If you've got the evidence to say that they are an A-grade student on a report, then you can still give them an A regardless of them bombing out on an exam. Without the evidence you've got. So, I want to take you through some guiding principles, I guess, around quality assessment, and also thinking about a bit of a framework that you can use when you're starting to, I guess, assess your own assessment framework from your own assessment practices. And what better framework to use than A to E? I reckon that's what it's good use. So the A of assessment. You've got to be clear about what it is you want students to achieve. Now in the new curriculum, you've got achievement standards. Fabulous things that took forever to write, and we argued over single words that I guarantee once you people get a hold of them, you'll totally misinterpret it, and that's all part of curriculum implementation. But wow, we spent some time arguing over it. But you need to be able to understand and articulate what those standards mean in the context of your kids, your lessons and your learning intentions. And it's going to be different across every single classroom, and that's a good thing. And if you come along tonight to the dinner, the evening program, I will entertain you with why it's important for curriculum to be flexible. Don't let that scare you off dinner. We're talking about curriculum over dinner, it's scaring me already. So you need to be able to articulate what is it that you want students to be able to demonstrate. And then from the assessment, you need to be able to say, this is what I know Johnny can do, and this is how he's shown me and demonstrated that to me. That's the information you need for assessment. But there's another A, and that's around accountability. And you shouldn't see accountability as a big stick, and a lot of people do. Accountability should be about you being able to hold your hand to your heart and say, I've given this kid a fair judgment on his performance or her performance. It should be about, I've got to put something down because I've got to hand this report out. You need to be fair and equitable for all students. So you need to have evidence that demonstrates what each student can know and do. In health and PE, and in PE in particular, it's hard to get that evidence because you're out in the field often and you're having to gather information and record that information in a way that's tangible. And can I tell you, I spent a day with the Ogilvy team when I was still with the car doing some work around assessment, and Anthony Coe and Anita have iPads that they've got set up, pick their brains about how they record what kids are doing in student performance. Because it's easy, it's manageable, and everything's there. So when you've got your parent-teacher conferences, you don't have to worry about parents arguing with you anymore about why did you give my child a C and not an A. You just put your iPad out, you've got full portfolios there and go, this is why. It makes it easy. So B, and this goes back to the conversation around half-yearly and yearly exams. The B is about making balanced judgments. If you're relying on an exam to make a judgment about a student's performance in health and PE, you've missed the point of health and PE. The skills and the understandings that we want kids to develop in our subject area, they can't be assessed in complete. We want kids applying stuff. We want kids doing stuff. And a lot of the content that's written into the new national curriculum is about learning through movement. So you can't demonstrate an understanding of that application through movement if you're sitting in the desk. So it's got to be out there, it's got to be in the field, it's got to be doing as they're learning. So you don't have to stop what you're doing and start to assess. Assessment should be part of the teaching and learning program. It should happen as a part of each and every lesson. Moving on to C, open up the file. Okay, reading behind you. So the C, and C is all about consistency. So again, it's about fairness again. So if you've got 5 people on your staff, you want to be confident that if John's giving an A to his students and Pete's giving an A to his students, they're doing the same thing. Now in my faculty of 11, Pete had the best performing classes ever. Everyone got an A because they all had to go. Oh, they're good kids. I can't keep all the good kids. So you have to be able to be confident that there's consistency in the feedback and the grades you're going to give. And that has to be independent of the teacher that's giving that feedback and those grades. Has to be independent of the student. So it shouldn't matter whether the student's a rat bag or whether the student's the best kid in the class. There has to be consistency in how we mark them. The location, so whether it's in a movement lesson or whether it's in a classroom-based lesson, the level of performance should be the same in terms of expectations and the time when it happens. So if you award somebody, and this is one of the elements that I get probably the greatest number of questions around, particularly because we've written a curriculum in 2-year bands for Year 1 through to Year 10, is how can we assess kids in Year 1 against a Year 2 achievement standard? The same way you would assess a Year 2 kid against a Year 2 achievement standard. You're assessing them against what they've been taught and what you expect them to learn. If they've learned everything they possibly could and they're demonstrating that understanding at a high level and they're demonstrating those skills that you would expect them to learn in that first semester of Year 1, then they can be an A or a B. It's about what they've learned up to that point in time, not against the entirety of the curriculum that's expected for that Year 1 and Year 2 band. Does that make sense? And that's really important because there's a lot of states. New South Wales have always had 2-year what we call student outcomes. They've always been in 2-year levels, but some of the other states have worked in year-based performance descriptions and reference points and progression points. So there's a little bit of confusion there. You assess students on what they've been taught. You can't assess them on what they haven't been taught. And again, I keep coming back to this, and I'm going to keep harping on it. Why do we need consistency? Fair and equitable to all of our students. Because if it's not fair to kids, it shouldn't be happening in schools. But how do we get consistency? So we've got to build in structured times where we can actually talk to other teachers. What do you think an A looks like in this particular unit of work? And when we're talking about units of work, we need to collaboratively plan those programs. So rather than each teacher designing their own program, collaborating so that if you're on the same grade as somebody else, you've both got this similar, not necessarily the same, but similar learning intentions, and you're able to actually articulate that to other teachers so that when you start looking at your assessment practices, they can be consistent as well. So that you're all working from the same page when you're starting to, one, give feedback to students, but also in terms of the expectations that you have for students. A lot of kids will say, oh, we don't want such and such a teacher because she expects us to do lots of work. We want this guy, or this. I shouldn't always make that strives to be bad. I've had some bad female teachers as well. But, you know, to make sure that the expectations on learning for students. The D, now we're getting into the body. But it continues on. It's all about professional dialogue. And this isn't just dialogue within your school. So this dialogue is now starting to happen nationally because we've got national achievement standards which for the first time ever in health and PE, there's a consistent expectation for every single student in Australia. One, that they get health and PE every year from foundation to year 10, which that's never happened before. And that there's an expectation that within those health and PE programs, regular physical activity opportunities are provided through PE lessons. So if you've got schools that are trying to scrimp and save on timetable time, saying, well, we won't teach PE in year 9 or year 10, which happens in a lot of schools in some states because, you know, they need to spend more time on those academic subjects that are going to be externally moderated at the end of year 10. You've now got a bit of paper that says you can't do that. Unless you've got a really, really good excuse that you can give to whoever's the accountable person. It has to happen. And every single Minister of Education signed off on that. And if you want the paperwork on it, go to the curriculum design paper for ACHPER. It's in black and white. It also gives an indication of the level of time that was notionally allocated to health and PE writers when you're writing the curriculum. So the expectation is the curriculum that's being written requires 80 hours a year to deliver it as intended. So there's another argument for you. You can't go and say, you have to give me 80 hours, but if the curriculum is to be delivered as intended, it would take 80 hours to deliver it. The depth and detail. So what are you going to talk about with teachers? I reckon the first conversation has to be around the achievement standards. So what do each element of those achievement standards look like in lessons that you're going to deliver? And if you don't feel like being outside or being active, because it's very cold outside, I might say, in New South Wales, freezing. You might want to come to the workshop because we should go through this process in detail in terms of identifying aspects of the standards, looking at aligning the content and then actually developing some assessment tasks from that content that you can take away with you. But discuss with your colleagues what the standards are, what they mean. There's words in there that, I'll tell you, the standards are very generic. And it's to provide flexibility so you're not locked into having to do certain share interpretations of those standards. So collect work samples for kids. So I think, you know, this is showing pretty good quality when it comes to these particular understandings that you've got. What do you think? Don't be scared to share your work with them. And certainly the Ogilvy gang are probably a good group to get in touch with as they progress through the process of collecting work samples that you can use on the ACHPER website. And those work sample portfolios will give you another point of reference around what do each of the standards look like at above, below and at the standard. And then share your understandings of student achievement. And that's particularly in reference to when you're about to start making judgments for the report. So that particularly if you do some team teaching and collaborative teaching, make sure you're both on the same page with the student. And finally, the E. All of your assessment's got to be educative. So it has to be integral to what you're teaching. So don't have a mentality, right, stop everything, we've got to do an assessment task today in class. Because all of the research shows that if that's the way to assess, students don't perform to their best if it's a stop everything assessment type task. If they're performing as they're learning, then you get a much richer and a much more authentic indication of their level of performance. And it has to be evaluative. So if you're doing a particular lesson and you're wanting kids to perform or demonstrate a certain skill and they don't get it, don't always blame the kids. Have a look and see if there's a better way that you might be able to introduce and deliver that content. Because the self-reflection that you can do based on your assessment practices with your students is amazing, and you should be using it. But there's another E, and today I'm going to give an E+. Because the most important part is to be able to collect evidence. So build a picture of each of the students in the class. What can they do? Where are the areas where you think they can improve? And target both. If kids have got strengths, build on those strengths. And it's similar to what Jude was saying this morning. If kids have success in PE, they will continue to engage. But if they're always getting feedback that they're not quite there and they haven't got it, then their impetus and their I guess, motivation to continue to try to learn something, particularly a movement-based skill or a movement-based understanding, it diminishes quite quickly, particularly in the secondary. It doesn't take much to knock the wind out of the sails when it comes to PE. And we're probably the only subject where every single failure that a student has is in a very topical learning area. So we have to be very careful about how we set up assessment in our learning and in our lessons. But again, it's about that on-balance judgment. So if the kid performs reasonably well in most of the activities that you assign to them, and then have one or two little blips where they either skyrocket into an astounding performance or they bomb out miserably, then you need to be able to make a professional judgment. And as teachers, you're allowed to do that. Even if it's the half-yearly or the yearly exam that they bomb out on. That isn't the sole descriptor of what they can do. So make sure that you've got that evidence to be able to justify a balanced judgment. And when you're thinking about evidence, how much? You don't need to record every single thing that you see a student do. And when you're starting to think about your assessment, if you give an assessment or you give a task and every single student can do it really well, then you probably don't need to record that either, because there's no distinction between levels. It's where you can get really discrete differences in information about, who's performing well, who's performing at the standard, who's probably a little bit below what you need to work with to get them up to that standard. And the why we assess. If you're assessing and doing half-yearly exams and yearly exams, and a lot of the responses to why you're doing a half-yearly, all the other subjects do it, kids might take it seriously if you don't do a half-yearly exam. That's rubbish. Try getting rid of them and see if kids still take it really seriously. And I guarantee they will. About what you teach in the classroom, not whether you have a half-yearly exam or not. The when is really important, and this is probably a whole workshop in itself, but you've just got to think about how you time your lesson. So Jude talked about that downtime that happens in the beginning of lessons where we're marking roles. Now, marking down whether kids have uniforms or not, probably not a great way of spending that time at the start of a lesson. You might have to take attendance because you've got to send it off in case there's any kids truanting. I don't know whether that still happens in schools, but what I tell faculty is a really easy way to make assessment and collection of that evidence much more manageable is mark your roles at the end of the lesson and take mental notes during the lesson about which kids did what well and which kids might need a little bit of extra support in the next lesson around the skill that they were trying to do or an understanding. And just create columns in your role. So it's easy as setting up, and I'm happy to share some templates that I've used with other schools where you mark attendance, but you can also take little notes around, you know, whether they participated in group discussions, what sort of level of understanding were they demonstrating in that group discussion, you know, how much input did they have to movement challenges in terms of solving problems if you're doing movement cases. And it's just come up with different ways that students are going to be demonstrating their understanding of a particular unit of work. If they demonstrate it in a lesson, then tick it off. There's your evidence. Go on one spreadsheet so that when you come to make your reporting judgment, you've got a whole heap of evidence in front of you that you can make that judgment on. And you've also got lots of words that you can use in your comment about what students did well and where they need. And the how. So the how is about the templates as well. The most important thing is it's got to be manageable. Don't create these fantastical ways of assessing students that then mean that you have less time on the weekends because you're not marking half-yearly exams now, but you're having to come up with these really creative ways of assessing students. As I said, it's got to be part of what you're teaching and learning. So it shouldn't be any more work except having a conversation with your colleagues or having an internal conversation about, right, this is what I'm going to be teaching today. What do I want students to learn? How am I going to know if they get it or not? And it could be as simple as that. If kids get it, you tick. Kids don't get it, you cross. Very simple way of recording. And as I said, I'm doing the workshops this afternoon, so if you want to come along and delve into a bit more detail, feel free to. But in summing up, make sure when you're assessing that you assess on sport, that you're assessing in a way that's going to elicit a range of performance. So you don't just want all students to be able to get an A or all students to, you know, bomb out. You've got to make sure that you're getting a full spread of performances. It has to be part of the teaching and learning. And what's really important, particularly with our young people today, is you've got to allow a number of different ways that students can demonstrate their understanding. So don't rely on one task or one learning activity to collect all of the information on a particular aspect of understanding the skill. Make sure that there's multiple ways, but also multiple points in time where you might go back, because some kids may not get it the first time, but they might get it the third time. You've got to give them multiple times to demonstrate. And it has to be inclusive of all learning. So we go back to that slide. You can't get an elephant climbing a tree. And there's some things that some of our students are just never going to be able to get a handle on, but it doesn't mean that they can't demonstrate understanding. That's particularly true if you've got any students who have got physical disabilities. They can still demonstrate the vast majority of the achievement standards that are written into the curriculum around movement aspects. Questions? There's some sort of meeting.
Thank you very much, Janice. Now, obviously, Janice is Janice has got some sessions happening this afternoon, and she's also been kind enough to do a presentation for us this evening as well, the night program. Please try and tap into her wealth of knowledge with curriculum design and assessment. If you get an opportunity to work with her, please do so. Interestingly, I just got an email from the president of the Victorian branch of ACHPER saying that she was watching this live from her desk while she was working, which is quite amazing, and saying, oh, we've always wanted to do this, but we thought it was cost prohibitive. Well, anyway, we put her on the two drive sparks over here. Before we go to the next presenter, please, while we've got an opportunity, Nathan Horn is here from almost from Singapore. And Nathan, thank you so much for coming all this way. Homegrown, please give him a round of applause. And Nathan's going to be doing a presentation after this one today. There's a short break, but they're doing a presentation along with Jane, of course, and they're both geared towards primary and secondary education, so we're thrilled with that. Got a tweet away, Kelly?
Yeah.
Good on you.
We've almost had 10 followers that are watching this live, which is great. It's fantastic. And I didn't mention before, we've got over 1,200 people see one of our Facebook posts during the week. It's about the evening session and the day session. That was brilliant. So the tweet away, we're going to give it to Monster up there. We're going to give it to Dean Atkin for his tweet, which was fantastic. I can't remember off the top of my head, but.
I believe that.
Come and get your prize, mate. It was a great tweet. Funny to invite our parents here to hear that talking.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Really good. Dean Atkin, everybody, Smithton High School. Was good on track level, wasn't it, Tina? 200? Yeah. Very nice. Okay, our next guest today on the podium is Ella Dixon. Hello, Ella, how are you? Thank you very much for coming on today. I think we're all in a very similar boat, and that is our budgets are dwindling. There's always a fight for resources. Wherever you are, with whatever school you're at, there is added pressure on you to write submissions and to gain extra resources. So we thought that it was a really fortuitous idea to bring someone in to speak to you about grants and submission rights, and give you some strategies as well to do that. Ella works with multiple supporting organisations, from little ones all the way to state bodies. She has a fantastic understanding of strategic and program planning, submissions, grant writing. It goes on forever. You'll see that. Couldn't believe it. Wow. So please, would you welcome Ella Dixon, please, from the department.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this meeting. I would have said no if I hadn't seen it on YouTube. Basically, a couple of fears this morning. One is I thought I wanted to be a lecturer at one stage. This is quite intimidating being in a room like this. It's different when it's flat in different chairs, but people coming down is quite beautiful. And the other one is PE was my least favourite subject. It was really quite intimidating. I was fascinated with the young child, therefore I didn't participate in a lot of sport. I nearly drowned in the swimming pool. I was also in Division F. So therefore PE wasn't a good thing for me. Luckily, I'm now over my asthma and I can participate in sport. So thank you for inviting me. And I do hope that I can bring some perspective into this mystique for the grant writing project planning. A lot of what I talk about comes from my perspective as someone who has developed grant writing programs, as someone who has written many grant applications, assessed funding applications, and also I wrote my first grant application when I was in grade 10, when I was part of the student council. So, and that was a successful one. I didn't actually start writing a lot of grant applications till I joined local and state government, when one of the things in my KPIs is to actually write and bring in money to the local community. So I come to you as somebody who can share my experiences from those stages of grant writing, and also someone who's received them. So that's one of the biggest joys of grant writing is actually when you are successful and you get the money. And also before I go Smithton, I'm a Smithton girl.
We're not giving them any more money, are we?
Oh, so just some pretty basic stuff. What is a grant? Grant is basically something that's awarded to a community organisation by some level of government or a philanthropic organisation, and there is no requirement for you to pay it back. There are some instances when you need to pay money back if you don't use it for the right purpose or if you have a lot of left over. But basically, a grant is something that's awarded and you're not required to pay it back. Parties to a grant are the grant made by the grant provider. Usually, again, that's a government agency or a not-for-profit organisation like a community fund. Local councils, you might see in Saturday newspapers that they advertise quite a number of community-based grants. And then the other side of that is yourself, if you are applying, you're the grantee or the grant recipient. So it's the party that receives the money from the funding body. So just basic stuff, because when I come to a room like this, I'm not sure how many people have a level of experience with grant writing. So So with every grant funding, there is an application process, and there are some requirements that you have to meet to be able to win these grants. So if you gave me thinking, looking for the secret of grant writing, sorry guys, there isn't a secret to grant writing. But what we say to groups is that if you can write clearly, if you can write a good business letter, you can write a grant application. And one of the key things that if you can keep in mind is if you're writing for an intelligent 13-year-old, that's what's called a layperson. So use the language as if somebody who's an intelligent can read and understand what you're talking about in your application. If you consider that the only tools that we have in grant writing are words, because it's not often you can submit videos, it's not often you can submit photos. So words are the only tools that you have, so use them wisely. The other last point there is about explaining the wow or the so what factor. As somebody who's read hundreds of applications before, trust me when you read the 50th one for that day, it starts to become really bland. It's a little bit like applying for a job. If you've ever been on a panel, you know that by the time you've read the 10th application or the 12th application, you're starting to lose interest. So you're looking for that wow factor and that so what factor. The grant cycle looks typically like this. So there's that bit. Number one is preparation, which is where we're focusing our presentation today. Number two, apply, receive, and deliver. So really around project management and also project evaluation. What I'm going to cover today is about project planning, which is a really, really crucial part of grant writing. And most of you probably have heard that adage, fail to plan is planning to fail. And that's really, really true when it comes to grant writing. From my experience, I think you need 80% of the time in grant submissions doing the thinking, making decisions, talking to people, nurturing those relationships, and also understanding what the problems that you're trying to solve are. And then the remaining 10 to 20% is the actual writing. If you know what to write, you can write it. You're all different teachers, you can all write, you can all speak. But if you need to go back to the committees, if you need to talk to the kids, if you need to talk to the principal, if you need to talk to service clubs about your particular project, you're going to run out of time because normally you get around 6 to 8 weeks to write a grant application. There are lots of grant funds where you know that they're going to come up every year, and that's good, you can prepare, but there are some that just come up and they'll be due in 6 to 8 weeks' time. So if you've done no work whatsoever, if you haven't spoken to the people that you need to speak to, your time is going to be a bit of an empty point. So it's all about the planning and also a little bit of persuasion. And the key here is to make sure that you communicate in the words that you write where the planning body fits into what you're trying to do. It's fine to talk about the problem, it's fine to talk about the solution, but you need to show and articulate where exactly the planning body fits. And your application is not all about you, it's as much about the grant provider. Some of the key things that we can do to find out what's important to the grant provider is go on their website. Have a look at what they've funded before. Sometimes even pick up the phone and talk to the people that have been successful previously in grant applications. I certainly used to do that. Just pick up the phone and talk to the successful applicants. And very often they're quite willing to share, and there's a couple of instances people that just email me their applications. So you can cut a lot of the work by actually being active and being smarter about how you do these things. They're the ones that have been willing to give in their applications for federal grant applications. It's a little bit different if it's a state government thing because you don't want to be giving a lot of secrets to potential competitors for the grant application. Make sure you target and tailor your application and pitch it at the right level. And I'll show you how to do that in the short time that I have. Firstly, though, grants are not always the answer. One of the things we do at grant writing workshops, we basically do one a month in every region of Tasmania every year. One of the things that I talk to people about is grants the only answer to your problem? Because with grants comes a whole range of administration. So if you're already looking for small amounts of money, consider something like this. If you ask a service club for $3,000 cash to do something, they might say, no, sorry, we don't have that in our budget. But if you ask them to build it for you, for example, that I've got here is the community garden, they're probably more inclined to say yes. Because service clubs have a lot of volunteers, they have contacts with places like hardware stores and suppliers, contractors. A lot of them are business people, so you may be able to tap into that resource without actually going through the grant process. Another example I can give you is I have a friend in Sydney, and she was getting a little bored with her job, and her director said to her, how would you like to work in the not-for-profit sector for 6 months and help out a bunch of community groups to do what they want to do? And she did that. So having a human resource like that for 6 months for any community is a great asset. So if you've got things like that, just be open. Be willing to receive anything. You just never know what opportunities might open up. The other way is, can you raise the money? If you're looking for $1,000 for sports equipment, can you break it up like this? If you're looking for $500, very small amounts of money. I would suggest to you it's probably a lot easier to do something like this than it is to write a grant application. Also, the grant cycle is such that sometimes, by the time you apply, get your submission in and actually get the money in your bank account, it could be 6 months. So perhaps it's something that you may also consider around the timing of your applications, how you might like to do that. There are other ways to raise funds. You can save, you can look for sponsorships, do some fundraising, there's crowdfunding, or you can pour ice in your head. Apparently that raises more money as well. So if you can come up with a scheme that's as successful as that, I think it's great. So how do you decide which projects to apply for? The first couple of weeks I've already talked about things like vision and support to you, and the fact that you are relationship builders. The key thing about this slide is working from a strategic perspective. I think if you're looking for money for projects, it's a really good idea if you're coming at it from a strategic point of view. So use the school's strategic plans, or use the community groups that you work with. What's important to them? Ask them what they want to do and what the problems are in that community, and then come up with projects. I used to work for a circulating council, and the mayor would often come to me with a little newspaper cutting of an available grant, and he's saying, "Can we apply for this?" And I'd always check it against the strategic plan, because if it didn't meet the objectives in our strategic plan, we didn't do it. And that's my advice also to community groups: is don't just apply for anything. Make sure that you're actually doing this for a purpose. What is your 5 to 10 year plan, and does this thing fit with what you're trying to do? If you're always working from that perspective of trying to meet your vision and mission statement, I think you're closer to being a successful organisation. So try as much as possible. There will be some grants that are just too good to miss out on, and you just need to apply for it, and that's fine as well. But I think if most of your projects come from some sort of higher level document or some sort of higher level thinking, from a group like this one, I think you're better off, because you'll be able to communicate that in your application form as well. And what you're probably saying, what if you've got 5 or 10 projects? That's fine, because you can actually start to get the project plans ready for each one of those, and start to think about what you need in terms of resourcing. You can start to put some timelines around when you want this to happen by, and you have a bit of a layout of when you think these things might happen. And when a grant round opens, you're ready to pounce on it. And the second dot point there is to make sure there's somebody on the committee that is looking out for funding sources. One of the things that we do in the Department of Premier and Cabinet is we have a grant alert list. So if you're interested in receiving information about that grants, we actually have a service where we send you some information about different types of grants. And trust me, you will not be lonely if you're not on that alert list, because we send a lot of information. These are just some elements of a good project. Pretty common sense. Well planned, clear about the needs, good communication between everyone, adequate resource, and right people. One of the key themes that I've found in my sort of grant writing career is this theme about relationships and how important they are in grant writing. Not only the relationship with the grant body, but the relationship with the key stakeholders, with the key partners, with the communities that you work with. I think if you can nurture a lot of those, your path to really good grants is still well underway. So every time I have a project that I want to do, or even in my personal life, this is how my brain works. I have a problem in the middle, and I just have this slide. So just do a mind mapping exercise of those 5 questions. And with grants as well, in the how, I will also put the how much in that column. So that's really the first 6 steps I'm going to just quickly run through for you, just to show you how you start to develop a grant application by using that framework. So step 1 is to watch, and this is really about the outputs, outcomes, and objectives of the project. And it's really about your committee to work through knowing about the ins and outs of the project. What is the scope? What are you trying to achieve? What is the problem? Some of you also might think, well, what do those words mean? Because there is a particular language that comes with grant writing. And you only get used to them as you do more and more grants during your lifetime. Outcomes might be called goals in some, and aims and objectives, strategies. You might see those, but interchangeably, what they're thinking of is outputs. What is the physical thing that you're going to spend money on? The outcomes, what benefits will be derived by them giving you the money? And the objectives, what are you trying to achieve with this? Because every grant provider there is, they have this great desire to give money away to good projects and to good people. So your job in that is to fulfill that desire. And you do that by asking and knowing within your own group who's doing the application what these things mean and what you're trying to achieve with your project. Yeah. I'm going to use an example of a mobile community online which was funded by the Tasmania Fund. So it just goes to show you how they're structured, the problem, what they want to spend money on, and what the outcomes are going to be. I also talk about this concept of elevator pitch to people. So picture this, you're in an elevator and you just happen to bump into the Minister for Recreation. And he says, tell me more about this project, how do you respond? I think if you are part of a group who's looking for money, you ought to think about what your elevator pitch is going to be, in case you're talking to potential sponsors, potential grant providers. So one of the ways I do that is by using that little mind map and also coming up in 25 words or less. Those sorts of things. So there's an example that I've given about a project for healthy eating and exercise. And in 24 words, I've been able to say what the project's about. And it's probably something that most people can memorise in your group. So you can have the same skill if you like, seeing off the same sheet. Because what you don't want is different people talking about the same project, but in a different context. The step 2 is why, and it's really about describing the problem, getting statistics and documenting your claims. And also, it's about pitching to the grant provider what's been done today and what remains to be done, and then how to fit into that. And this also, the other thing about letters of support. Be choosy about who you seek letters of support from, because more often than not, you're limited in the number of letters that you can submit. I'll just quickly run through all the steps. So I always tell the people, just tell your story, and think of it in terms of a fairy tale. Once upon a time, there was a community or a group of students who had this problem, and this is how they would like to fix it. So think of it in those terms. The step 3 is who, and this really is about the drivers of the project, who is going to make it happen, who are your partners, who is going to benefit, and are you best placed to deliver that project. So again, it's about understanding the project inside and outside. And the thing with grant providers is they don't just want to back the jockey, they also want to back the horse. So they're looking for people with good projects that are going to be in good hands. Because they want to fund things. They don't want to fund things that might go over and things that might cause some frustration in the end. Step 4 is the how and how much, and this really is about implementation and accountability, evaluation and budgets. I think of budgets as the second way of writing the grant application, because if you have 10 items, you can check those activities against those items in the project. So for example, if you say you're going to have consultants, match a consultant fee for $5,000, make sure you mention the consultant on the application. And also listed there's some common in-kind items that you might do. The more in-kind support you can put in the grant application, the better it is, because it demonstrates the level of community support. And so I would even I would say to people, put in, if the CWA donates 10 cakes so that you can raffle, put that in. It's not about the monetary value that's placed against that item, it's about the number of people that are supporting the project. Even things like photocopying, printing, Step 5 is when. It just really is about the project starts, finishes, and also the stages, and also being able to identify any risks associated with completing the project on time. And also when do you need the money. You really need somebody on your committee to be a bit pedantic about timelines in detail, because it's really important, if you do get the grant, to have somebody who's wary about reporting requirements and approvals and that kind of thing. Point of time people. And step 6 is where, and this is particularly important if you're applying to federal government programs, because again, when I'm working circular head, a lot of people think you know where that is. In fact, when I bring up Canberra, they say circular head, or Sydney, and we also say no, it's at far northwest Tasmania, isolated, this far from the regional centre, no public transport. So it's about placing context around the area that you're wanting to work in, and use Tasmania's isolation by definition of the federal government to your advantage. Because it's not about things to say that we're isolated, we don't have a lot of people here, and we have all these barriers to participation. So just to, in summary, be clear about what you want to do, why, when you want to do it, how, where, and who the audience and clients are, and who will manage the project. These are things that really are important to the grant body, and when we're sitting in the assessment panel, this is how it goes. They get a pile of applications, there's a yes pile, a no pile, and a maybe pile. And what you really want to do is to get into that yes pile straight away. You don't want to go out and technicality. I've listed some grant funding sources here. I believe our presentation should be on there, right? So I'll just skip through these ones. So the first thing I said, if you list it, don't break the unbreakable rule, and this is to read the guidelines. The grant speak, the keys that you might get are always in the guidelines. This is the easiest way to get into the no pile if you don't follow the rules. So I suggest get the highlighter out, start doing that mind map, and start noting down some of the things that you might be able to glean from the guidelines. It will tell you things like who can apply, who can't apply, what activities they will provide for, what they won't provide for, and also things like deadlines. So have a look for those. It's also an opportunity for you to pick up the phone and establish a relationship with the provider. And again, that is key, because the person you may speak to may not be the person assessing them, but they're most likely going to be in the group and those things are discussed. Test community fund, just very quickly, is one of the major sources of grants in Tasmania. That's how much they give out every year, and they award around 70 grants per year. 80% of the grants that they award are up to $50,000, so they're quite small grants. The chances of success are around 40% now that they've got a little small grants program. And these are the funding categories. So in terms of your group here, you can probably pretty much tick all those apart from here. Tick all those boxes. So it's a good source of information in terms of where to find a grant. The thing with TCF is they're less likely to find projects that are sensitive for sports policy members, and also they're reluctant to find things that are the responsibility of other levels of government. And schools fall in that category, so education is an department. So just need to be, just free up the fund and ask them what the criteria might be and how you might. Yes, specifically the TCF fund. If you are unsuccessful, I think if you're allowed to, you can contact the grant provider and ask for some feedback so that it does improve your chances for next time, and use that feedback in the next application. And also, don't be afraid to resubmit. There's one project that I've applied for 5 times with different funding applications before I was actually successful. A lot of the time, it's just a matter of oversubscription. They just don't have enough money for the number of applications that they receive. So just be persistent. If it's a good project, somebody will find it one day. So just to be a winner, these are my take-home messages. Work from a strategic perspective. Investigate other ways to fund it. Nurture the relationships that you have. tell your story, create the elevator pitch, and make sure all your committee members and all the people that might be talking to the potential sponsor, make sure that they memorise it and resubmit if they're not successful. So I wish you all the best. Your grant writing is it is fun and it's good to get that check.
We'll be working with you closely.
Sorry, if you want to go on that grant to work list, you can find me on
Okay, so we're a little bit behind time now.